You think power is loud? That it shows up in arguments? In shouting? In the ability to dominate a room with your voice? You've been lied to. The world told you that those who speak the most win. That those who react fast control the outcome. That stillness signals surrender. But what if that's the illusion? What if real power isn't in what you reveal, but in what you refuse to? Silence is not surrender. It's strategy. And those who master it don't need to impose. They direct. Nietzsche called it the will to power, not the will to control others, but the will to govern oneself, to resist the instinct to react, to choose timing over impulse, to move with precision. In a world addicted to noise, the one who can remain still is the one who dominates quietly. So if words are weapons, then silence is the guidance system. Silence isn't the absence of power, it's power distilled. Because when you stay silent, you observe, you calculate, you wait. And when you do speak, every word cuts deeper. In a world obsessed with speed and noise, silence is strategy. It's what separates those who react from those who redirect. The one who listens controls the tempo. The one who waits controls the outcome. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who cannot remain silent is ruled by what he cannot resist." Let that sink in. The one who must speak is not free. He's compelled, pulled by impulse, exposed by emotion. His need to respond becomes his leash. But the one who can resist that urge, the one who lets others reveal themselves, that's the person in control. And the great thinkers of history knew this well. Socrates didn't dominate conversations with declarations. He asked questions. Genuine, disarming, surgical questions. He let others overextend themselves. He let truth emerge by letting silence do the pressure work. Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai, mastered more than the sword. He mastered the mind. In battle, he waited. He made his opponents exhaust themselves with movement, while he stood in stillness watching, calculating. One strike, one end. Because silence is not passive. It's composure. It's knowing you don't need to respond to everything. That not every comment deserves an answer. That real power isn't in proving, it's in preserving. When you speak less, your words gain weight. When you appear less, your presence gains value. Every word you don't need is energy you just lost. It trains your instinct to resist the bait, to disengage from the emotional trap that most people fall into over and over again. And what does that give you? Time, clarity, control. Because in silence, you're not just listening to others, you're learning to hear yourself. But silence isn't just about controlling others, it's about mastering something far harder yourself. Silence isn't just discipline, it's a weapon. And like every powerful weapon, it works by targeting something deep inside the human psyche. Let me explain. Speech is a confession, even when you mean to conceal. A thought, a fear, a need, a crack in the armor. The more you speak, the more data you give away. And in the language of psychological strategy, data is vulnerability. Modern psychology has a name for this breakdown: identity dissonance. The conflict between the self you project outward and the emotions you can't control inward. The more emotionally charged you are, the more disconnected those two selves become. And nothing exposes that faster than reactivity. When someone insults you and you lash back, they now know what gets to you. They know where to poke. They know what makes you move. But when you remain still, when you offer no reaction, you take away their power. And something strange happens. They don't feel strong. They feel exposed. Because silence doesn't reflect your weakness. It reflects their noise. It turns the spotlight back onto their behavior and forces them to confront it. This is why silence feels so uncomfortable to most people. Not because it's empty, but because it leaves them alone with themselves. That's the real pressure. That's the real psychological warfare. Think about it. In an argument, what would happen if you didn't respond at all? If you just held eye contact and said nothing, they'd begin to spiral. They'd start filling in the silence with assumptions, with insecurities, with guilt, with self-doubt. Because silence is a mirror. And mirrors don't show what you say. They show what you fear. You see this play out every day. In negotiations, the one who talks first usually loses. In social media, the one who responds to every jab always looks weaker. In digital warfare, the one who needs the last word has already lost control. Silence forces your opponent to face the only thing they can't predict themselves. And this is where you begin to separate yourself from the rest. Most people are slaves to the stimulus. They see, they react, they hear, they speak. They're always broadcasting, never observing. But you learn to pause. You hold your ground. You let the silence do the heavy lifting. But silence is just the first layer. There's a weapon even more powerful. The art of disappearing on purpose. Let me tell you something that few understand. Absence doesn't weaken presence, it sharpens it. In fact, one of the greatest psychological triggers in human behavior is called the scarcity bias. It means this: the less available something is, the more we want it. Not because it changed, but because our brain assigns value based on absence, not abundance. This principle is used everywhere. Why do luxury brands release limited quantities? Why do high-level CEOs rarely speak in public? Why do some artists vanish for years before dropping a single project that sends the world into a frenzy? Because scarcity builds mystique. And mystic builds perceived power. It's the exact opposite of what we're taught. You've been told, stay active, stay visible, stay relevant. But constant presence is self-cancellation. When you're always there, you become wallpaper. You become noise. And noise gets tuned out. Now, let's be clear. Disappearing isn't about hiding. It's about controlling perception. It's not about vanishing randomly. It's about withdrawing intentionally. Because when you withdraw at the right moment, you create tension, curiosity, craving. You let the silence build demand. It's the same in relationships. The one who's always available, always responding, always giving is rarely valued. But the one who is selective, measured, strategic with their energy is unforgettable. Because people don't chase what's abundant. They chase what they might lose, what they can't fully figure out. And gaps invite imagination, your most loyal ally. Imagination is the multiplier of desire, and nothing fuels it more than strategic absence. So what does this mean for you? It means you need to master your presence like a resource. You don't give it away to everyone. You don't speak in every room. You don't respond to every poke. You choose your moments with surgical precision. Because the one who controls their presence controls the room, even in absence. You become the name that lingers, the thought that echoes, the presence that feels larger because it's not always there. And here's the irony. The less you try to be seen, the more people look for you. But to disappear the right way, you need something rare, something most never develop: patience. We live in a culture of urgency. Everything now. Right now. Instant answers. Instant message. Instant gratification. React. Respond. Reply. We've been conditioned to believe that the faster you move, the more powerful you are. It's not speed that wins, it's restraint. In truth, the one who cannot wait is the one who cannot lead. Immediacy is weakness. Delay isn't weakness. It's concealment. You give away your position, your intentions, your vulnerabilities. And every time you wait, you gain something few. Ever experience leverage? Patience is not just a virtue. It's an invisible weapon. And it doesn't look like power until it's too late. Nietzsche understood this. To him, the will to power wasn't about domination. It was about internal mastery, the power to restrain, to delay gratification, to choose the timing of your actions, not react from impulse. Stoic philosophers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius said the same. If you are patient in one moment of anger, you will escape 100 days of sorrow. What they meant was simple. If you let emotion dictate your action, you lose the war before it starts. But if you wait, if you absorb the tension without reacting, the game bends in your favor. Because patience does two things at once. It destabilizes the other person. It clarifies your position. In silence and delay, the other person reveals themselves. They project. They expose. They assume. They get desperate to fill the space you refuse to fill. And that's where your advantage begins. Because you are no longer reacting, you are dictating the rhythm. This is how generals think. This is how great negotiators win. Not by out-talking the room, but by outweighting it. The best plays often require saying nothing, doing nothing, waiting until everyone else has spent their energy, and then you strike. Clean, calculated, unstoppable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people can't wait. They fidget. They fill the silence. They seek closure, not clarity. Only the secure can sit in stillness. And most people seek speed because they're afraid to sit with uncertainty. But if you can sit in uncertainty, if you can tolerate the tension while others rush to resolve it, you win without forcing a single outcome. And in that delayed moment, something unexpected starts to form a psychological void. There's something deeply uncomfortable about silence, about space. Abouvoid. Most people can't stand it. The moment there's no feedback, no reply, no reaction, their mind goes to war with itself. Because nature hates a vacuum, and the human mind, it fills that vacuum with assumptions, doubts, insecurities, narratives. The less you say, the more they imagine, and what they imagine is often far worse than anything you could have said. That's the paradox of silence. When you don't respond, you don't disappear. You become amplified inside their imagination. Their mind spirals. Not from you, but from what you didn't say. Did I go too far? Why didn't they answer? Did they not care? Or are they planning something? And suddenly, you're not even present anymore, but you're controlling their thoughts. Because silence forces people to confront their own voice. And for many, that voice is filled with doubt. This is the psychological power of the void. It doesn't require you to attack. It only requires you to not defend. Because when someone provokes you, what they want most is your reaction. They want you to prove you're affected. They want you to expose yourself in the moment. They want to see that their words made you move. But when you give them nothing, when you just sit in that space quiet, calm, unmoved, they begin to panic. They search for signs. They try harder to trigger you. They double down. They unravel because they've lost control. And you haven't even moved. This is the secret. People don't fear what you say. They fear what you're not saying. The ambiguity, the mystery, the unspoken. It's a mirror. And it reflects not who you are, but what they fear. And here's where it gets brutal. The one who cannot sit in silence ends up confessing through noise. They try to dominate the silence and end up confessing. And those assumptions expose their inner world. They weaponize themselves without even realizing it. And all you did was hold the void. That's the turning point. Because from here on out, you no longer have to strike. They will strike themselves. There's a principle in Stoic philosophy that changes everything. You cannot control events. You can only control your response. Think about that. You can't stop people from provoking you. You can't silence their judgments, their criticisms, their noise. But what you can do is decide whether they move you. Reaction is control. Hand it away. Impulse is the leash. You just didn't see who's holding it. You've handed the steering wheel to the outside world. And this is where most people live, as emotional puppets. They hear something they don't like. They lash out. They see something that offends them. They explode. They feel disrespected. They explain, justify, beg. That's not power. That's predictability. And what's predictable is manipulable. Because if I know what moves you, I know how to control you. But now flip the script. Imagine being the kind of person who doesn't flinch under pressure, who doesn't explain themselves to win approval, who doesn't react because they've mastered the space between stimulus and response. That space is where real power lives. Because in that space, you can observe without absorbing. You can think before acting. You can decide not to play. That's not weakness. That's sovereignty. It's what the Stoics trained for. Not to become numb, but to become unshakable. To live from the inside out, not the outside in. He is most powerful, said Seneca, who has power over himself. This is not about emotional suppression. It's about emotional command. When someone provokes you, they're extending an invitation to enter their frame, to step into their chaos, to dance to their rhythm. But you don't RSVP. You observe. You assess. And if necessary, you respond with clarity, not compulsion. That's the difference between the reactive and the strategic. Reactive people lose themselves every time someone pulls the right emotional trigger. Strategic people hold the frame. They decide what deserves their energy and what doesn't. This level of self-mastery makes you dangerous because you become unreadable. When others don't know what affects you, they can't manipulate you. They can't provoke what won't move. They can't dominate what doesn't need to defend. Because the one who doesn't react cannot be dragged, only followed. And here's the twist. When you control yourself, you begin to control the world around you, not through force, but through presence, through clarity, through the quiet confidence of someone who plays on their own terms. There's a reason people chase what they can't have. It's not just emotion, it's design. In psychology, it's called the scarcity principle. The idea that the less available something is, the more valuable it becomes. We don't just want what's good. We want what's rare, what's elusive, what doesn't beg for attention. Presence attracts attention. Absence commands it. This is the logic behind luxury brands. Why does a simple handbag become worth thousands? Why do people wait for months for a watch? Why do exclusive drops sell out in seconds? Because scarcity creates significance. When something isn't always available, our brain interprets it as important, désirable, high status. Now apply that to people. What happens when someone is always there, always answering, always explaining, always trying? They lose weight. They become background noise. They become easy to reach, and therefore, easy to overlook. But the person who withdraws strategically, who knows when to step back, who understands the value of absence, becomes magnetic. You don't chase attention. It begins to chase you, not because you demanded it, but because you created a vacuum. And vacuums get filled especially by curiosity. You leave space. Space for others to wonder, to imagine, to project, and the mind always amplifies what's missing. That's the secret. Absence isn't emptiness. It's influence in disguise. Because in your absence, you are rewriting your perceived value. You are no longer seen as accessible. You're seen as elevated. You're not just available, you're in demand. And the paradox is brutal. The more you strive to be seen, the less visible you become. The more you allow yourself to be missed, the more unforgettable you are. This is not about being manipulative. It's about being deliberate. You're not disappearing randomly. You're controlling presence as a strategy. The same way a rare gem is valued, not because it shouts, but because it's hard to find. When you learn to create absence on purpose, you take control of desire, dynamics. You stop seeking desire and become its center of gravity. And that's the highest level of influence, not forcing attention, but drawing it in through restraint. The moment you stop needing attention is when it finds you. Now you understand something most people never will. Power was never in volume, never in dominance, never in being the loudest voice in the room. Real power lives in silence, in restraint, in the ability to hold your energy when the world demands a reaction. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to be seen in every moment. You don't need to explain yourself just because someone challenged your truth. All you need is control. Control over your words. Control over your timing. Control over your presence. That's the game. And here's the twist. The ones who truly win are the ones who don't need to play. Because when you master silence, you don't fight for attention, you command it. You don't chase validation, you replace it with self-certainty. You don't broadcast your worth, you radiate it quietly. With every move you don't make, let everyone else burn themselves out in the noise. You stay still, measured, deliberate. Let them demand. You observe. Let them react. You wait. Let them chase. You become the center of gravity. That's influence. No tennoise, Not theatrics, not performance. Discipline in expression is dominance in perception. And you now have the tools. You understand the power of silence. You've seen how absence increases value. You've felt how non-reaction shifts control. You've learned to let others reveal themselves while you remain unreadable. So now, the question isn't, does this work? It's, will you use it? Because most won't. Most will go back to noise, to impulse, to needing to speak, to prove, to be seen. But not you. If you've come this far, you're not like most people. You're ready to operate at a higher level. A quiete level. A level where you don't need to dominate, because you've already detached from needing to. That's what makes you dangerous. Not your words, but your control over them. So, here's what I want you to do. Mark this shift. Anchor this state. Comment below. Silence is power. Say it, not just for the algorithm. Say it to remind yourself that you've crossed a line few ever do. Because in the end, true power isn't in playing well. It's in outgrowing the game entirely.